Buddhism for today, The Essential Wisdom of the Threefold Lotus Sutra by Nikkyo Niwano. Part 2, The Sutra of the Lotus Flower of the Wondrous Dharma. Chapter 4, Faith and Understanding. The meaning of faith and understanding. Faith is the working of emotions, and understanding is the function of reason. People often say that faith, or religion, is not an issue of reason or logic, but something that must simply be accepted and believed. But faith in the absence of understanding can be extremely dangerous. If a religious teaching is of little positive value, or worse, destructive, then blind faith can not only be detrimental to oneself, but can even end up exerting a harmful influence on one's family and the wider society. Even if a teaching is beneficial, as long as we have only blind faith in it, without any hint of understanding, our faith in that religion can easily be shaken to its core amid unfavorable circumstances. Suppose, for instance, that without rhyme or reason, someone believes that they will miraculously recover from their illness, or that their life will improve if they only believe in a certain religion. If the person recovers, they will continue to believe with wholehearted gratitude, but if, after a time, they suffer a relapse, their faith will most likely turn into doubt. For argument's sake, add to this that their child fails to gain admission to university. All of a sudden, the religious faith this person firmly held to that point suddenly begins to crumble. This sort of change of heart is a common occurrence which happens because such a person's religious belief can't be considered firm faith in any true sense. Instead, it is nothing more than inflexibility because it lacks understanding. True religious faith can always be comprehended through reason, and the Lotus Sutra calls this sort of knowledge understanding. Embracing a spiritual teaching from only a rational point of view, however, makes for an unbalanced religious faith. While you can spiritually develop up to a certain point through such one-dimensional faith, you will find it difficult to advance much beyond your initial progress. Earlier in this book, I wrote that Yoichi Yoshida felt like a fool when he first learned fractions. Yet, it was the experience of taking great pains to grasp the calculation 1 divided by 3 equals 0.3 repeating as a number without a repeating decimal that led him to become fascinated with fractional numbers. This sense of fascination or enchantment is comparable to faith, and the great effort Yoshida made on his own to discover a number to express 1 divided by 3 equals 0.3 repeating without the repeating decimal is the kind of effort at understanding that makes faith strong and firm. Genuine spiritual paths of truth are extremely profound. In the case of Buddhism, even if we can understand through logical reasoning that the Buddha is ultimately universal truth, when we try to completely fathom the implications of what this really means, we discover that universal truth is immeasurably profound and impossible to grasp through reason alone. Just as 1 divided by 3 is a calculation that yields 0.3 repeating ad infinitum, when it comes to spiritual truth, there always remains a similarly small gap that for some reason or other feels unbridgeable to us. This is what is referred to as a mystery, an aspect of truth that we cannot apprehend through the human faculty of reason. A famous scientist has said that the greatest mystery in the history of human consciousness is the modern way in which we comprehend the universe through science. What he meant was that the universe we understand today, from the perspective of science, is probably far more awe-inspiring than any mystery that primitive humans felt in the face of natural phenomena, such as the sun and moon, stars, volcanoes, and storms, or the sense of wonder that any philosophy or religion inspired in the minds of human beings in any previous age. The more scientific knowledge increases, the more breathtaking the universe becomes. The mission of science is limited to applying reason and logic through theory and experimentation to pursue this mystery wherever it may lead, and this quest is outstanding in its own right. On the other hand, religious faith uniquely allows us to slip directly into this mystical side of reality. The sense of fascination with 1 divided by 3 that Yoichi Yoshida experienced is precisely what I am referring to when I use the word faith. When we are in this state of mind, we are no longer merely within the domain of reason and logical thinking. We run into a dead end if, without knowing fractions, we attempt to grasp the reality of 1 divided by 3 as a number without a repeating decimal through our faculties of reason alone. We are left with no alternative but to accept that 1 divided by 3 cannot in fact be expressed as a number that is not a repeating decimal. In any case, since we can actually fold a piece of paper perfectly into 3 equal portions, Practical experience gives us the gratification of an intuitive, visceral understanding. When spiritual practice similarly demonstrates the reality of human existence through experiential understanding, it enters directly into our hearts, working to give us peace of mind. This dynamic is what we call faith. But faith that is attained entirely through reasoning lacks the power to move others. Intellectual understanding that does not translate into action is bereft of the power, the energy to uplift others. In contrast, robust faith has power and energy. If a person has this kind of energetic and powerful faith, regardless of their education or social standing, they are able to rescue others and lead them to liberation. There is a caveat, however. If the basic principles of a person's faith are unsound, that kind of dynamic energy ends up exerting a negative influence on those around them, and this can extend even to the society as a whole. This is why faith and understanding must come together hand in hand. Ultimately, a healthy spirituality combines both faith and understanding. On the one hand, the teachings of the Buddha can be understood rationally. They do not demand blind faith that runs counter to reason. We can develop this understanding of the Buddha's teachings by listening to discussions of the Dharma and carefully reading the sutras. And, as our understanding progresses, it naturally and spontaneously inspires faith. On the other hand, a trusting and flexible person will often believe something when they are told that it is true, even if they can hardly comprehend it. As far as the teaching of the Lotus Sutra is concerned, this is not dangerous. As such a person feels wholeheartedly grateful for the teaching, their understanding will gradually deepen in the course of learning the Buddha Dharma through studying the Lotus Sutra. In short, we can enter through either faith or understanding, but if we do not eventually combine both of these elements, we will never have a truly dynamic spirituality. Now let us explore Chapter 4 of the Lotus Sutra. The Four Great Shravakas, Acknowledgement and Remorse. As we saw in Chapter 3, the Buddha has just given the Shravaka Shariputra an assurance of Buddhahood and explained the principle of the one vehicle in a way that was easy to understand by telling the parable of the burning house. In this chapter, the four great Shravakas, Subhuti, Mahakatyayana, Mahakashyapa, and Mahamaggalyayana, realize the preciousness of the Dharma as never before, and this makes them ecstatic with joy. Immediately, they rise from their seats and, placing their palms together, bow in reverence and address the Buddha in unison. We are the senior leaders of the Sangha and advanced in years, having already freed ourselves from worldly sufferings and troubles, and seeing no need to strive for anything more, we fail to diligently aspire to the supreme perfect awakening of the Buddha. The World-Honored One has expounded the Dharma for many years, and all the while we were seated at your assemblies. Because we had become physically weary over time, we felt no need to pay further attention to your explanations. We sat there overly concerned with the equality of things, emptiness, viewing all things equally, seeing their absence of all attributes, and dealing with all things impartially, practicing non-production. We were so taken with the preliminary teaching of emptiness that we did not appreciate the Bodhisattva's practice that is kindled by the wish to help people attain true happiness, benevolence and kindness, and the desire to help them eliminate their suffering, compassion. To help free people from suffering and attain happiness, Bodhisattvas discover the needs of people and share the Dharma with them in ways appropriate to each person. We fail to aspire to these practices that Bodhisattvas pursue in order to purify the world through the liberation of each person by helping them develop their basic natures and capacities. There are no words that can adequately express how much we regret our shallowness. But on hearing the assurance of Buddhahood that our fellow Shravaka Shariputra received when he was told, "You will certainly attain supreme perfect awakening," we felt a joy that we had never before experienced. We never expected to hear such a rare and extraordinary teaching. We rejoice at this infinitely rare jewel that, though we had never sought it, has fallen into our hands. World-Honored One, we have indeed understood the teaching you have just expounded for us, and now please allow us to demonstrate our understanding by telling a parable. Then the four great Shravakas tell the story that follows. The parable of the rich father and the poor son. A certain young boy slipped out of his father's home and ran away to another country, where he lived in poverty for many years until he was 50 years old. The older he grew, the poorer he became. Roaming up and down the country in search of work, he eventually wandered in the direction of his native land. His father, greatly pained by the loss of his only child, had searched in vain all over the country for his son. Eventually resigning himself to the loss of his son, the man stopped and settled down in a certain city and became extremely rich. His fortune was incalculable, and he lived in a grand mansion with many retainers and servants. The poor son wandered aimlessly through village after village, from one country to the next, until at last he reached the town where his father had settled. He found himself standing right before the gate of his father's house, although he had no idea who lived there. During all these years, not a single day passed that the father did not think of his long-lost son, but he never revealed this to anyone. Alone, he constantly mulled over his loss, thinking, "I have grown old, and even though I have great wealth, when I die it will all be scattered and lost. How relieved I would be if I could only get my son back and pass my wealth on to him." About that time, the poor son, who had moved from one place to another working as a day laborer, just happened to stop in front of his father's house in the hope that the residents would give him some work. Standing by the gate, in the distance, he saw a dignified elderly man, seated on a great chair with armrests carved in the shape of lions, surrounded by many prominent-looking admirers. The whole scene so beautiful and awe-inspiring that it naturally elicited admiration. The poor son, who was shocked and seized with fear, thought, "This man must be a king or some sort of royalty. This is not the kind of household that will hire me as a day laborer. I should go to some poor hamlet where it will be easier for someone like me to find work. If I linger here too long, I might be arrested and pressed into forced labor or worse." And with that he abruptly ran away. In the meantime, at first sight, the rich elder had immediately recognized his son standing far off in the distance, and was filled with joy, thinking, "My long-lost son has finally come back home to me, and now I can leave all my wealth to him." But just as he was having this thought, the rich man was startled to see his son suddenly run away. So he dispatched some attendants to chase after the son and bring him back. When he was caught by these attendants, the son was terrified and screamed, "I haven't done anything wrong. Why are you grabbing me?" But the attendants refused to let him go and forcibly dragged him back as order. Detained despite having done nothing wrong, the son was convinced that he was going to be killed. Paralyzed by terror, he fainted in fear and collapsed on the ground. Seeing this from afar, the father ordered his attendants, "I have no need for this man. Do not bring him here by force. Splash some water on his face to wake him up, and tell him nothing more." The father knew that after a long life of deprivation, his son did not have the self-esteem to approach as dignified and wealthy a person as he. Although the father knew for certain that this was his son, he decided to keep this from the others and instead use different methods to gradually bring his son to his side. After splashing some water on the son's face to awake him, the attendant said to him, "You are free to go wherever you like." The poor son was delighted and, bowing submissively, he departed and headed straight for a poor hamlet in search of food and clothing. The father, seeking to entice him back, devised a plan. He secretly sent two men with haggard faces and disheveled appearances after his son, instructing them, "Bring the poor man back here by telling him you have a good job for him, which will pay him double the normal daily wage. If he asks you what kind of job it is, tell him that he will be shoveling dung, and that both of you will work alongside him." The unkempt appearances of the two messengers put the son at ease, and, thinking that the job was perfectly suited to him, the son followed them back, receiving his wages in advance and joining the messengers in the task of shoveling dung. Seeing his son at work, his father was struck by compassion, half in disbelief that this was indeed his son. Some time later, he caught a glimpse of his son's figure again, gaunt and covered from head to toe in filth and excrement. At which point the father, unable to bear his feelings of pity for his son, changed into filthy garments himself, purposely smeared his body with mud and dust, and, taking up a dung scoop in his right hand, joined the laborers. "Get back to work, don't be lazy," he scolded the workers. But little by little, the poor son let his guard down, and the father was finally able to get close to him. Later, the father said to his son, "I hear that you have fallen on hard times and have nothing to live on. From now on, you'll be all right. You'll always have a job here, understand? There is no need to look anywhere else for work. I'll even increase your wages, and you can take whatever you need for your use. Essentials like bowls and utensils, or rice, flour, salt, vinegar, and so on. There is even an old servant whom you can use if you need him. There is no need to worry any more as long as you are here. I feel like a father to you. I am old, but you are young and strong, with your life ahead of you. All the time you have been working here, you have never cheated anyone, or been lazy, became angry, or complained. But you should know that in contrast to all the other laborers, if in the future you ever do any of those things, I will be disappointed. From now on, I will treat you as if you were my own son. Then the elder gave him a new name and began referring to him as my son. While the son rejoiced at how the elder treated him, he still thought of himself as nothing more than a laborer. For this reason, the elder continued to employ him to remove dung for another 20 years. By the end of these 20 years, the father and son came to understand and trust each other. The son was no longer intimidated by the rich man and became comfortable entering the rich man's home without reserve. Nevertheless, the self-abased mentality remained unchanged. So instead of staying in the elder's house, he continued to live in the same place as before. Eventually, the elder fell ill and, knowing that his death was approaching, he entrusted his son with the management of the storehouses that contained all his wealth. Nevertheless, even though the son had gained the father's confidence, feelings of inferiority lingered somewhere in his mind. But within a short time, the son became familiar with his father's entire household and all his possessions. This inspired him greatly, as he became confident in his ability to manage his father's house by himself. He was now ashamed of his formerly timid self in lack of confidence. At long last the father felt a great sense of relief and, knowing that his end was near, he instructed the son to assemble all his relatives, royalty, ministers of state, members of the Kshatriya warrior class, and householders. When they had all gathered, he declared, "This man is actually my real son, the child born to me, and I am his real father." And, explaining how this could be so, the father told them, "All the wealth that I possess now belongs entirely to my son." When the son heard this, he was ecstatic to gain something so unexpected, and he exclaimed, "I had no aspiration to seek this wealth, but it has come to me all by itself." Meaning of the parable. This is the parable of the rich father and the poor son, the second of the Lotus Sutra's 7 parables. As soon as the 4 Shravakas finished telling this parable, they turned toward the world-honored one and declare, "The wealthy elder is just like the Buddha, and all of us are like his son." They proceed to explain how each of the scenes of the parable corresponds to one of the compassionate and powerful skillful means that the Buddha had applied in various ways to lead them to the teaching of the great vehicle in the face of their complacent satisfaction with a lesser enlightenment. This chapter then concludes with Mahakashyapa's retelling the parable in verse. From our point of view, the poor son obviously symbolizes all living beings, but, for now, let us take the poor son to primarily represent the 4 great Shravakas and apply the parable to their case. The poor son, who fails to recognize his real father, namely the Buddha, and runs away from him towards aimless wanderings through human sufferings, signifies the condition of living beings in this world. At this stage, the 4 great Shravakas are no different from ordinary people like us, but the parent-child relationship is nonetheless indisputable. The son is completely unaware of their tie, an allegory for his ignorance of his own Buddha nature. Yet in the course of his passage through the realms of suffering, he inevitably encounters his father. We are all like this. There is something marvelous about how, without realizing it, we too instinctively draw closer to the Buddha. Even though ours is a world of the evil age of the 5 decays, reading this passage fills our heart with rays of hope. Standing at the gate of the Buddha's house, however, living beings still do not know that he is their father. But the fact that the Buddha immediately recognizes us, his children, is deeply profound. The Buddha is always close to us. The ultimate truth pervades everything, everywhere. The Buddha is always waiting for us to discover this. We have only to attune our minds to the Buddha, who is universal truth. The Buddha tries to lead living beings to the truth, to awakening, but they turn their back on the Buddha because they harbor feelings of inferiority in their hearts. Their inferiority complex makes them think that the Buddha's teachings are too sophisticated, hence impossible to approach. At this juncture, the Buddha uses skillful means by dispatching 2 messengers. These messengers represent those whom the living beings would feel at ease keeping company with, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas have the same appearance as ordinary living beings, but are more spiritually advanced. because having worked at the house of the Buddha, their minds have settled into a secure state of concentration. Employing the sun to remove dung symbolizes how the Buddha leads living beings to remove their delusions by cultivating the practices of the lesser vehicles. From this part of the parable forward, the allegory applies more to the four great Shravakas than to ordinary living beings. After gradually making the four Shravakas familiar with him and his teachings in this fashion, the Buddha wants to call them his children and raise them up to the teaching that accords with his ultimate intention. But the four Shravakas still do not grasp the family-like connection, and thinking that those teachings are over their heads, they make a clear distinction between themselves, including their own awakenings, and the Buddha. For this reason, they continue to practice the lesser vehicle diligently for 20 years. This is the portion of the parable that ordinary living beings find difficult to emulate. For 20 long years, Subhuti, Katyayana, Kashyapa, and Madhgalyayana continued to diligently remove dung without becoming bored, negligent, or quarrelsome with their fellow practitioners. In this way, they finally attained perfectly free and unimpeded minds and became broadly familiar with the Buddha's teachings. At this point, the Buddha throws open the doors of the treasury of his teachings and says to the four Shravakas, "You can use all of these treasures however you please." This is the Buddha's cryptic way of hinting to them that because they are his real children, they can take whatever and as much as they wish. But the four Shravakas still see themselves as mere servants and cannot overcome their self-abasing mentality. Even though they work as Shakyamuni Buddha's representatives, teaching in place of the Buddha flawlessly and impressively, they still fail to realize that all his wealth actually belongs to them. They cannot transcend the nature of the two vehicles, and they remain perfectly content with their status. The Buddha is now approaching his passing, and just prior to it, he expounds the Lotus Sutra, proclaiming, "All living beings are my children, and I am their father. All living beings can become Buddhas." This great proclamation first takes the Shravakas by surprise, and they are overjoyed to realize that all the Buddha's wealth, his awakening, is sure to become their own. The parable's four precautions. This parable presents us with a picture of both the long process of practice that the four great Shravakas endured, and how the Buddha continually watched over them and gradually lifted them up with his compassion and power of skillful means. We are fortunate in that, having encountered the Lotus Sutra first, we are able to fly directly into the arms of our true parent, the Buddha, who elevates us just like mothers or fathers lift up their children. We do not have to detour through a long, roundabout route like the disciples of the Buddha's time, who began following him before he taught the Lotus Sutra. But in order to take this direct route, we must keep several precautions in mind. We can learn these from this chapter. Arrogance and humility. The first precaution we should take away from this chapter is that we must toss aside any sense of inferiority we may have. To look down on ourselves as good-for-nothings is to deny our own Buddha nature and is, by extension, an insult to the Buddha. We should always tell ourselves with no inhibitions, "I can become a Buddha too. I am one with the universe." Better yet, we should say this to ourselves out loud. If we recite this single-mindedly for a set period, we can enter a state of samadhi, a complete concentration of the mind. This concentration gives us a reassurance that gradually grows into tremendous self-confidence. The kind of self-confidence this practice nurtures should not be mistaken for arrogance, however. It could not differ more. To be arrogant is to presume that one has realized what in reality one has not, an assumption made through petty calculations of an ordinary human being. On the other hand, when we have truly realized something, oftentimes we are not immediately aware of the fact of our own realization. Being fully aware of one's own state of realization is a considerably higher stage of awakening. You may remember that in Chapter 1 of the Sutra of Innumerable Meanings, we read of the five-part Dharma body, or the five eminent virtues that the Bodhisattvas who were gathered at Divine Eagle Peak possessed: precepts, meditation, wisdom, emancipation, and perception of emancipation. Being fully aware of our realization corresponds to perception of emancipation, the last and highest of the five-part Dharma body. Most of us, however, only gradually become aware of our own realization by experiencing its results. For example, we feel lighthearted, carefree, and unconstrained, but we are not entirely sure why. No longer are we annoyed by or afraid of the insignificant events and changes that occur around us. Things feel as if they are all going our way. When we seem to feel this way without even being consciously aware of it, we have attained the first stage of awakening. For this reason, being constantly mindful that we too can become Buddhas and that we are one with the universe, when we experience this free and unimpeded feeling in some way, it hardly qualifies as arrogance. We must adopt a humble attitude when we listen to the Buddha's teachings and communicate them with others. Neither our state of mind nor its outer expression should ever be haughty or arrogant. When we ponder the ultimate truth in the recesses of our own mind, however, we can be as proud as we like. We can even say to ourselves, I am heir to the entire universe because I am the child of the Buddha, and so I can make the universe my own. As a matter of fact, thinking this way is a direct route by which we can race straight away into the arms of our true parent, the Buddha, who, like a mother or father, protects and nurtures us so that we too become Buddhas. This is the one great cause of the Buddha's appearance in the world, maintaining faith and understanding. The second precaution in the chapter is that we must maintain firm faith in the Lotus Sutra while also having a deep understanding of it. Without both, we will not be able to run straight away into the arms of the Buddha, our true parent. Without both faith in and understanding of the Lotus Sutra, we will be prone to stray on unnecessary detours and wander into blind alleys that lead to nothing but life's dead ends. If this should happen to us, we must read the Lotus Sutra over again. When we do so, we always discover a way out of these impasses and back to the direct route to the Buddha. For the Lotus Sutra contains teachings appropriate to people in every possible situation. Somewhere along the way, while reading it, something in the sutra will open our eyes in a flash, and that burst of spiritual inspiration will become our escape from the blind alleyways of life, emulating the Buddha's use of skillful means. The third important precaution we can learn from this chapter is that, while those of us who have encountered the Lotus Sutra and have been able to attain understanding and faith can run straight away into the arms of the Buddha, today's world of the evil age of the five decays is literally filled with spiritually poor children. We ourselves cannot say that we have embodied the essence of the Lotus Sutra unless we have led at least one person to liberation. In order to lead these people to liberation, we must thoroughly understand the essence of skillful means as expressed in the chapter, and at that same time, emulate the Buddha's use of skillful means. We should not forget that the shortest route to the real thing always begins with emulating another's example, demonstrating our realization. The fourth principal lesson this chapter teaches is an excellent way to deepen our faith and understanding. The four Shravakas listened to the Buddha's exposition of the parable of the burning house and understood it well, but they did not simply stop at comprehending it. They actively demonstrated their understanding by telling another parable to the Buddha. Merely receiving the teachings passively falls short. Actively demonstrating our realization is an extremely effective way to deepen our own understanding and enhance our faith. Moreover, this merit is not limited to us. Our demonstration also deepens and enhances the understanding and faith of others. This chapter strongly implies that we should not overlook the importance of sharing our own spiritual experiences with others.